Putin is really hoping to get Trump one-on-one so he can present his case, bamboozle him all over again, because we all know that Trump tends to agree with whoever he spoke with last, and maybe he thinks he can just keep stringing along Trump for forever.
Now, today is the deadline set by Donald Trump for Russia to agree to ceasefire talks with Ukraine or face economic sanctions. Now, there is no sign of these sanctions yet, but the American president has confirmed that he will meet his Russian counterpart Putin in the coming months coming weeks with or without President Zelensky. Now, Trump spoke in the Oval Office last night, making it clear that the ball was very much in Putin's court.
Is your deadline still standing for Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire tomorrow, or is that fluid now?
It's going to be up to him. We're going to see what he has to say. It's going to be up to him. Very disappointed, yeah.
Does Putin have to meet with Zelensky in order and before you and Putin have to meet? Or
No.
Let's now speak with Catherine Belton, who is Russia reporter for the Washington Post and author of Putin's People, How the KGB Took Back Russia and Then Took on the West. Catherine, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, look, this deadline has arrived today. The deal was ceasefire talks or face economic sanctions. What's going to happen next?
Well, it looks like Trump has essentially already done a taco, because he's granted Putin a meeting. He's promised that he will meet him without Putin actually having to make any concessions. There's no sign of any ceasefire on the horizon. It looks like Putin may have signaled he might be willing to provide some wiggle room on territory, but we don't actually know what was talked about during the visit of Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy to Moscow. And here we have Trump rolling over and granting Putin a summit, whereas before, Trump had been holding out on that because Putin was meant to agree to a ceasefire before any meeting were to take place, and yet that hasn't happened.
So it doesn't look like anything has really changed. I mean, do you think America will impose any sanctions on Russia?
Well, it's possible they will. I mean, they've said they will, but I'm not sure they're going to be the full-on, full-throated 100% tariffs on all countries trading with Russia, which really would have put a squeeze on India and China and really squeezed Russia's war machine. I mean, it may be these half measures like the 25% already announced against India. And it looks like Putin has been preparing today for that outcome. He's been talking with the leader of China, President Xi, and other leaders of Central Asia. Yesterday, he met with a senior Indian security advisor. So he looks like he's preparing for all outcomes. But really, he's got what he wanted, because somehow he's convinced Trump that he is in some way flexible enough for Trump to agree to a summit. But there's no sign that Putin is actually willing to stop fighting. And actually, for him, what's important is not kind of little bits of territory, but it's toppling the regime in Ukraine and making sure it's one that's pliant to his will, and he can get there many ways while continuing to bombard Ukraine.
And do you think sort of Putin is just playing everybody at the moment, and he is the one that's in control?
Well, it certainly looks like it, because Trump has completely rolled over on his stance from just last week when he was saying that he was he's still saying he's disappointed in Putin, but at the same time, he's saying he's ready to meet with him. Whereas before he was saying, well, I always come off the phone with Putin and think that I've had a very nice conversation. But then Melania tells me that actually he's just killed a lot of civilians through another bombardment of Kiev, and really what he was meant to do was to impose the tougher sanctions until Putin showed that he was actually ready to embark on a ceasefire, and there's no sign of that at all. So Putin is really hoping to get Trump one-on-one so he can present his case, bamboozle him all over again, because we all know that Trump tends to agree with whoever he spoke with last, and maybe he thinks he can just keep stringing along Trump for forever.
I'll just read out a really interesting message that's just come in, Catherine, from one of our listeners, Scott. He says, hello, Aisha. Churchill coined the word summit to describe a meeting between world leaders at the top of their game. This Trump-Putin meeting is the opposite, a plunge into the diplomatic abyss. A former KGB master and Cold War warrior used to playing the long game, facing a man who can be bought with a compliment. Putin would flatter, perhaps remark that Melania is admired all over Russia, and Trump will preen. History will remember the moment not as a peak of diplomacy, but as a humiliating low. I mean, do you agree with what our listener Scott has just outlined?
Yeah, he's basically hit the nail on the head. And I think today European leaders are in horror because this is exactly the outcome that they didn't want to see. I mean, we saw in April that Russia was perhaps willing to consider a deal which Witkoff had apparently put on the table, in which there could be a freeze to the fighting in return for all sanctions being lifted against Russia, which, of course, Russia would be dying to get, and then in a few months' time they could start fighting again and somehow blame Ukraine for it. But again, we have a situation where Trump is going to be meeting Putin one-on-one. Ukraine is going to be shut out of the proceedings, as is Europe. And given that this is critical for Europe's future security as well as Ukraine, there's just no way this should be happening, at least until Putin had actually imposed some kind of ceasefire. And there's no sign of this happening. So yes, it will be a humiliation completely and utterly for US leadership.
And do you think there's a situation you could ever envisage where Putin would ever agree to sit down face to face with Zelensky?
Well, I mean, I think that's possible, but probably only once he's achieved everything that he wants out of a meeting with Trump, in which the US has agreed to so many concessions that it looks like Zelensky's political position would be so shaky that he wouldn't last much longer as president anyway. Because if Zelensky is even forced to agree to freezing of the conflict on the current front line, without any security guarantees, without any indication that there are more arms coming in for him to be able to defend that territory, then there's no reason for Russia not to start again in a few months and then seek to blame Ukraine for it, in which case Zelensky's position would be so precarious politically, he would soon be out and Russia could start the meddling all over again. So yeah, he's in a very tricky position.
And speaking of Zelensky's position, I mean, he recently faced a lot of criticism over some measures around anti-corruption. Now, some people were saying actually that's sort of Russian interference. Other people were saying, is the shine slightly coming off Zelensky? What's your take on where Zelensky is at the moment?
Well, I think, he had quite a bit of political hubris, and perhaps he did act very hastily in relation to those anti-corruption agencies which were doing a good job. I mean, it sounds like there were some signs of Russian influence within those agencies. There were some individuals who may have been co-opted, but certainly to withdraw the independence of the entire agencies was the wrong step to take. Okay. The individuals should have been treated with on an individual level, but it looks like Zelensky has learned his lesson, and unlike Putin, he listens to the opinion of people on the street, and he very quickly backtracked on that.
Okay. Well, look, Catherine, really good to catch up with you. Thank you very much for your time. That's Catherine Belton, Russia reporter for the Washington Post. Now,